Israeli archaeologist announced to the world that she had uncovered the ruins of King David's palace in Jerusalem.
The city of David is more than just a tourist attraction. It's also a live archaeological dig. The Bible says this is where King David built his palace, and one archaeologist says she's found it.
For centuries, historians said he never existed. A myth, a legend, a story told to make people feel powerful. King David, the boy who slew a giant.
This is Herbat Kaifa in the Elah Valley. Not far from here, the Bible says David killed the giant Goliath.
The king who ruled Jerusalem was dismissed as fantasy until archaeologists uncovered something no one expected. Massive walls, stone foundations built with precision, a complex that could only belong to a king. The lost palace of David, hidden in plain sight, buried for thousands of years. And what they found inside doesn't just rewrite history.
An Israeli archaeologist says he found the legendary citadel captured by King David. That conquest allowed David to establish Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
It shatters everything we thought we knew about the biblical world. King David's lost kingdom. To understand why this discovery matters, you need to understand how badly the academic world wanted King David to be fiction. For decades, a school of thought dominated biblical archaeology that viewed the Old Testament accounts with extreme skepticism. These scholars, known as minimalists, argued that the great united kingdom described in the Bible, the empire of David and Solomon stretching from Egypt to Mesopotamia, was a fantasy created centuries later by writers trying to manufacture a heroic past for their people. Their argument was simple and, on the surface, compelling. If David was such a powerful king, where was the evidence? Where were the palaces? Where were the administrative buildings? Where were the monuments and inscriptions that every other ancient king left behind? Jerusalem had been excavated extensively for over 100 years. Archaeologists had dug through layer after layer of ancient occupation, finding plenty of evidence from later periods, but almost nothing from the 10th century BCE, the time when David was supposed to have reigned. They found small houses, modest structures, evidence of a simple agrarian society, not a powerful kingdom. The minimalists declared victory. David, if he existed at all, was nothing more than a local warlord, a petty chief whose legend had grown far beyond his actual importance. The united monarchy described in the Bible was a myth, a pious invention created to serve political purposes centuries after the events it supposedly described. This wasn't a fringe position. This was mainstream academic consensus. Textbooks were rewritten. Documentary films were produced. The story of King David was relegated to the same category as other ancient legends. Interesting literature that revealed nothing about actual history. But there was a problem with this conclusion that the minimalists consistently ignored. Jerusalem is one of the most continuously inhabited cities in human history. It has been built, destroyed, rebuilt, and transformed dozens of times over 3,000 years.
The excavation points directly to the time the Romans quelled a Jewish rebellion and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD.
Every conqueror, from the Babylonians to the Romans to the Crusaders to the Ottomans, tore down what came before and built something new on top of it. Finding evidence from the 10th century BCE in Jerusalem is like trying to find the foundation of the first house ever built in Manhattan. It's not that the evidence doesn't exist. It's that it's been buried under 3,000 years of subsequent construction. Some archaeologists understood this limitation. They reasoned that if David was truly a powerful king, he wouldn't have built only in his capital city. He would have established fortified positions throughout his kingdom, especially along its borders. He would have built military outposts to protect his territory from enemies. And those outlying sites, unlike Jerusalem, might have been abandoned and left untouched for thousands of years. That reasoning led a team to a hilltop called Khirbet Qeiyafa, about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. The site overlooks the Elah Valley, a natural corridor between the coastal plain and the hill country of Judah. According to biblical accounts, this valley was where the young David killed the giant Goliath. According to military logic, it was exactly where a king would build a fortress to protect his realm. Previous surveys had noted the presence of ancient ruins on the hilltop, but nobody had conducted serious excavations. The site looked like countless other unexcavated tells scattered across the region, an unpromising pile of rocks that probably contained nothing of particular interest. When the team began digging in 2007, they expected to find perhaps a small fortified village, maybe some pottery, possibly a few artifacts worth cataloging. What they actually found changed everything we thought we knew about ancient Israel. The two-gated city, David's lost fortress.
How the city of David lay hidden for nearly 2,000 years, until a British archaeologist began a discovery that continues to this day.
The first thing they uncovered was the wall. Not a simple stone barrier of the type found around small villages, but a massive fortification built from enormous stones weighing several tons each. The wall was over 10 feet thick in places, constructed using a technique that required sophisticated engineering knowledge and enormous amounts of organized labor. This was not something a tribal chief could build with a few dozen followers. This required hundreds of workers, operating under central command, with architects who understood load-bearing construction and logistics officers who could coordinate the quarrying, transportation, and placement of massive stone blocks. As they continued excavating, the scale of the site became increasingly clear. This wasn't a small outpost. It was a planned city covering over 6 acres, surrounded by fortification walls that stretched for over 2,000 feet. The construction showed evidence of unified planning, meaning the entire complex was designed and built as a single project rather than growing organically over time. Someone with enormous resources and authority had ordered this city into existence. The archaeological team sent samples of organic material found beneath the floor levels for radiocarbon dating. Olive pits, grain, charcoal from ancient fires. The results came back, placing the construction firmly in the 10th century BCE, the exact period when David was supposed to have reigned. For the first time in a century of excavation, archaeologists had found a major fortified site from precisely the right time period to correspond with the biblical united monarchy. The minimalists had argued that no such sites existed because the kingdom itself was fictional. That argument had just been demolished, but the walls were only the beginning of the surprises. As the team cleared debris from the perimeter, they made a discovery that had never been seen before at any site in the region. The city had 2 gates. This might not sound significant until you understand ancient military architecture. Gates are the weak point in any fortification. They are where enemies concentrate their attacks. Every other city from this period had a single gate, heavily fortified and easy to defend. Building 2 gates doubles your vulnerability. No one does that without a very specific reason. The team consulted the biblical texts. In the book of Samuel, there is a reference to a city called Shatters. The name translates literally as 2 gates. Scholars had long debated whether Shatters was a real place or a symbolic invention. Here was a city, from exactly the right time period, with exactly the feature that would explain that name. The city mentioned in the Bible as existing during David's reign had been found, and it was built on a scale that only a powerful central government could achieve. The gates themselves revealed sophisticated construction. They were integrated into a casemate wall system, meaning a double wall with chambers built into the space between. These chambers served multiple purposes, providing storage space, living quarters for soldiers, and additional structural strength. This type of architecture requires careful advanced planning. You don't build casemate walls by accident. You build them because you have architects who understand the technique and a government that can execute complex construction projects. Inside the gate areas, the team found stone benches, arranged in a specific pattern. These matched descriptions in ancient texts of how city elders would gather to conduct official business, settle disputes, and administer justice. The gates weren't just defensive structures. They were administrative centers, places where the authority of the king was exercised through his appointed officials. This was evidence of governance, evidence of bureaucracy, evidence of exactly the kind of organized state that the minimalists said didn't exist. The pottery that proved a kingdom.
They're finding a treasure trove of artifacts, including coins and 2,000 pieces of pottery a day.
The pottery told a story that no one could dismiss. As excavations continued, the team recovered hundreds of ceramic vessels from the ruins. Storage jars, cooking pots, serving dishes. The type of everyday items that reveal how people actually lived. What made these vessels remarkable was their uniformity. They weren't handmade by individual families with each piece showing unique characteristics. They were standardized, mass-produced, made according to specifications that were consistent across the entire site. This matters enormously because standardized pottery production requires centralized manufacturing. It requires workshops operating under some form of quality control. It requires distribution systems to move finished products from producers to users. In other words, it requires a government. Small villages produce varied individual pottery. Kingdoms produce standardized products. Khirbet Qeiyafa was producing kingdom-level goods. But the pottery contained an even more significant clue. Many of the storage jars had markings on their handles, symbols pressed into the clay before firing. These weren't random decorations. They were administrative marks, ancient versions of official stamps indicating that the contents of these vessels belonged to the government. This is evidence of taxation. Someone was collecting agricultural surplus from the surrounding population, storing it in officially marked containers, and maintaining it in government. Warehouses. You cannot have taxation without a tax collector. You cannot have tax collectors without a king. The dietary evidence was equally revealing. Archaeological sites accumulate food waste over time, and the bones left behind tell us what the inhabitants ate. At Khirbet Qeiyafa, the team found bones from cattle, sheep, and goats, standard domesticated animals for the region. What they did not find was equally important. There were no pig bones, not a single one. This absence is diagnostic. Nearby sites from the same period, particularly those associated with the Philistines who lived on the coastal plain, contain abundant pig remains. The Philistines ate pork regularly, but the inhabitants of Khirbet Qeiyafa did not. They were following dietary restrictions that matched the practices described in the biblical texts as characteristic of the people of Judah. This wasn't a Philistine outpost or a Canaanite city. This was a settlement whose inhabitants followed the customs of David's people. Then came the inscription. In one of the rooms near the gate, excavators found a pottery fragment with writing on it. Not random scratches, but an organized text written in an early form of the Hebrew alphabet. This ostrakon, as such inscribed pottery is called, contained what appeared to be a message about social justice. The text referenced protecting the poor, the widow, the orphan, themes that echo throughout the biblical prophetic tradition. The inscription's significance cannot be overstated. The minimalists had argued that writing was rare or non-existent in 10th century BCE Judah. They claimed that the sophisticated literature of the Bible could not have been produced by people who were essentially illiterate. Here was physical proof that writing existed in border cities during exactly the period when David was supposed to have reigned. If scribes were writing texts about social justice in a military outpost, what were they writing in the capital? The technology found at the site reinforced the picture of a sophisticated society. Iron tools and weapons appeared throughout the excavation. Iron was the advanced technology of the age, requiring specialized knowledge to smelt and forge. Finding iron implements at Khirbet Qeiyafa proves that the kingdom had access to cutting-edge metallurgy and could afford to equip even its border installations with the best available equipment. This was not a poor, backward society scraping by on Bronze Age leftovers. This was a wealthy, technologically advanced kingdom. The 10th century time capsule. Everything the team had found pointed toward organized central authority. The walls, the gates, the standardized pottery, the tax system, the literacy, the advanced technology, all of it indicated the presence of a powerful government. But the minimalists could still argue that perhaps this was merely a well-organized local community, not evidence of a great kingdom. That argument collapsed when the excavators reached the highest point of the site. At the summit of the hill, positioned to be visible from anywhere in the city and from miles around across the valley below, they uncovered a massive building, unlike anything else in the settlement.
About 20 miles outside Jerusalem, Khirbet-Qeiyafa was a border city in the Kingdom of Judah, not too far from Goliath's hometown of Gath.
The structure covered approximately 10,000 square feet, enormous for any building from 3,000 years ago. The walls were constructed from carefully cut stones, not the rough field stones used in ordinary houses. The rooms were large and open, designed for public functions rather than private domestic life. The placement was deliberate, commanding attention from everyone who entered through either of the two gates below. This was a palace, not a house, not a warehouse. A royal administrative building placed at the highest point of a fortified city to project power and authority. Its position mimicked descriptions in the biblical texts of how royal buildings were situated in relation to city gates and defensive walls. Someone who understood how kings built was designing this city. The palace layout revealed its function. There were large reception areas where officials could conduct business and receive visitors. There were smaller chambers that likely served as administrative offices. There were storage facilities integrated into the complex, allowing the collection and distribution of taxed goods to be managed from the seat of local power. This was a provincial government center, an extension of royal authority into a strategically important border region. The implications were staggering. If this level of sophisticated construction existed at a border outpost, what must have existed in Jerusalem itself? The minimalists had pointed to the absence of monumental architecture in Jerusalem as proof that no great kingdom existed. But Khirbet-Qeiyafa proved that the kingdom could build monumental architecture. It proved that 10th century BCE Judah had the organizational capacity, the technological skill, and the administrative sophistication to create exactly the kind of structures the Bible describes. The absence of similar remains in Jerusalem was a problem of preservation and continuous occupation, not evidence of historical fiction. The city's lifespan provided additional confirmation. Analysis of the archaeological layers showed that Khirbet-Qeiyafa was occupied for a relatively brief period, perhaps 40 to 50 years, before being destroyed and abandoned. It was never rebuilt, never reoccupied. The destruction layer sealed everything beneath it like a time capsule, preserving the 10th century BCE occupation with remarkable clarity. This timeline matched the biblical account of the early monarchy. David and Solomon's reigns together covered approximately 80 years. A border fortress built during their time and destroyed shortly after would look exactly like what the archaeologists found. The destruction itself carried significance. The site showed evidence of violent assault. Walls were toppled, buildings were burned. The city was not peacefully abandoned, it was conquered. Historical records indicate that the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak conducted a military campaign through the region approximately 40 years after the traditional dating of David's reign. A fortress guarding the approach to Jerusalem would have been a natural target for such a campaign. The archaeological evidence of destruction lined up with the historical record. Kingdom unearthed. The discoveries at Khirbet-Qeiyafa did not prove that every word of the biblical account is literally accurate. Archaeology rarely provides that level of confirmation for any ancient text. There are still debates about specific details, timelines, and interpretations that will continue for generations. But what the excavation accomplished was far more significant than settling minor disputes. It demolished the central argument of the minimalist position completely and permanently. That argument, repeated in academic journals and university classrooms for decades, claimed that no powerful kingdom existed in 10th century BCE Judah because no evidence of such a kingdom had ever been found. The absence of evidence, they insisted, was evidence of absence. No palaces meant no kings. No monumental architecture meant no organized state. The silence of the dirt meant the Bible was fiction. Now the dirt was no longer silent. Now evidence had been found, massive evidence, undeniable evidence, evidence that could only be explained by the existence of a centralized, powerful, administratively sophisticated government operating in exactly the time and place where the Bible said David's kingdom existed. The minimalists had built their entire case on a negative. They had declared victory because they couldn't find what they were looking for. And now what they couldn't find was staring at them from a hilltop overlooking the Elah Valley. The academic response to Khirbet Qeiyafa was telling in ways that revealed more about institutional pride than scholarly objectivity. Some researchers accepted the evidence honestly and revised their positions. They acknowledged that the minimalist timeline needed significant adjustment and that the 10th century BCE was more sophisticated than previously believed. These scholars demonstrated the intellectual courage that science is supposed to require, the willingness to change conclusions when new data demands it. Others did not respond so gracefully. Some attempted to minimize the significance of the discoveries, arguing that perhaps the site was built by some other power entirely. Perhaps the Philistines had constructed this massive fortress. Perhaps a Canaanite city-state was responsible. Perhaps anyone other than the kingdom of Judah had built it, because admitting Judah had built it meant admitting the minimalists had been wrong for decades. But these alternative explanations collapsed under scrutiny. The dietary evidence contradicted foreign origin conclusively. No pig bones meant no Philistines. The pottery styles matched Judahite highland traditions, not coastal manufacturing. The inscription used early Hebrew script, not Philistine or Canaanite writing systems. Every piece of evidence pointed toward exactly what the excavators claimed: a fortified city built by the kingdom of Judah during the reign of King David. Some skeptics retreated to increasingly narrow objections. They admitted that yes, perhaps a fortified city existed, but that didn't prove David himself ordered its construction. They acknowledged that yes, perhaps a centralized government operated in the region, but we couldn't know for certain it was the specific government described in the Bible. These objections missed the point entirely. The minimalists hadn't argued about specific kings or precise administrative structures. They had argued that no significant organized state existed at all during this period. They had claimed that 10th century BCE Judah was a backwater of scattered villages incapable of monumental construction or sophisticated governance. Khirbet Qeiyafa proved that claim was completely and utterly wrong. More sites have emerged since the initial discoveries. Other fortified positions from the same period have been identified along what would have been the borders of David's kingdom. Khirbet al-Rai, just a few miles from Qeiyafa, shows similar characteristics. So does the site at Beth Shemesh. Each new excavation reveals the same pattern. Massive construction requiring centralized resources, standardized pottery indicating government-controlled production, evidence of planning and administration that only an organized state could provide. The pattern is consistent across multiple locations. The 10th century BCE saw a powerful organized kingdom operating in the Judean highlands, building fortresses, collecting taxes, maintaining scribes, and projecting power exactly as the biblical texts describe. The scholars who spent their careers declaring David a myth have largely fallen silent. Their books remain on library shelves, but their conclusions have been overtaken by stones and pottery and bones that tell a different story. Some have quietly retired from the debate. Others have pivoted to new arguments that concede the basic existence of the kingdom while disputing details. Very few have publicly acknowledged how thoroughly wrong they were, or apologized for decades of confident declarations that the evidence now contradicts. The palace at Khirbet Qeiyafa stands as physical testimony to a historical reality that skeptics spent decades denying. Its walls were built by workers serving a king. Its rooms were designed for the administration of a kingdom. Its position was chosen to project royal authority across a strategically vital valley. Every stone in its foundation is an argument against those who declared David a myth. And with 95% of the sites still unexcavated and similar, sites being discovered across the region, the silence of the skeptics is likely to grow even deeper. The dirt has spoken, and the stones have told their story. But how much of it are we ready to hear? For every fortress uncovered, for every palace revealed, there are still layers of history buried, waiting for the next discovery to challenge what we think we know. What else has been hidden for millennia, waiting for the right eyes to uncover it? And if the evidence we've already found is only the beginning, what truths about the world of King David and civilizations long lost are still waiting beneath our feet? The story isn't finished, it's only just begun.